Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to dive deep into the latest developments surrounding the situation in Crimea and explore the strategic implications of Ukraine's latest offensive. What's unfolding right now is one of the most significant phases of the conflict since it began, and understanding its impact is crucial. The operation, often described as a turning point, isn't just about territory. It's about control, access, and long-term positioning. Let's break down what this Crimea cut-off actually means for Ukraine, Russia, and the wider world. Since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, the peninsula has stood as both a symbol of Russian power and a cornerstone of its military presence in the Black Sea. It hosts major naval facilities, air bases, and logistical hubs that connect Russian forces in southern Ukraine to the rest of the country. For Moscow, it's not just territory, it's prestige, a crucial link, and a military advantage. For Ukraine, it's a national wound that must be healed and a strategic challenge that must be overcome. In recent months, Ukraine's strategy has taken a distinct turn. Rather than relying solely on large-scale frontal assaults, it has adopted a hybrid approach focused on cutting Russia off, physically, logistically, and psychologically, from Crimea. The goal isn't necessarily to storm the peninsula overnight, but to make it increasingly isolated, vulnerable, and costly for Russia to hold. In simple terms, Ukraine aims to make Crimea more of a burden than an asset for Moscow. A major part of this plan has been to disrupt the land and sea routes connecting Crimea to Russia. The Kerch Bridge, one of the most high-profile targets, has been struck several times, dealing serious blows to Russia's ability to move troops, fuel, and equipment. Each attack weakens Moscow's logistics chain and sends a clear message: Crimea is no longer untouchable. The bridge, once a symbol of Russian permanence, is now a reminder of its vulnerabilities. Beyond the bridge, Ukrainian forces have also targeted the supply lines running through southern Ukraine, aiming to choke off Crimea from the mainland. By doing so, Ukraine reduces Russia's ability to sustain its forces, replenish ammunition, and keep the war machine running smoothly. Every rail line disrupted, every depot destroyed, increases the logistical strain on the Russian side. In warfare, cutting off supply routes can be as decisive as winning a major battle. Ukraine's approach has also included expanding its use of advanced weaponry and drones. Naval drones, in particular, have become game changers. These small, fast, and relatively inexpensive machines have allowed Ukraine to strike deep into Russian-controlled waters, hitting ships, fuel depots, and ports. This has forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to pull back, limiting its reach and influence in the region. The once dominant fleet is now under constant threat, which dramatically shifts the balance of power at sea. The air and missile campaign has also played a key role. Ukraine has used long-range precision strikes to hit targets inside Crimea, including radar installations, command centers, and air defense systems. By doing this, Ukraine isn't just destroying physical assets, it's undermining Russia's confidence in its own defenses. Each successful strike erodes the illusion of security that Moscow has tried to project. The broader implications of these actions are immense. Strategically, Russia's position in Crimea becomes less sustainable the more these connections are severed. If resupply becomes too difficult and risky, Russia will be forced to divert more resources just to hold onto Crimea. That means fewer troops, fewer weapons, and fewer logistics available for other parts of the front. Essentially, Ukraine's campaign stretches Russian capabilities thin across multiple fronts. For Ukraine, This strategy reflects a deep understanding of modern warfare. It's not always about direct confrontation. It's about disruption, exhaustion, and attrition. By making every movement costly, every supply run dangerous, and every facility a potential target, Ukraine erodes Russia's ability to operate effectively. Over time, that pressure can become unbearable. Economically, this offensive carries major consequences. Crimea's infrastructure and economy rely heavily on its connection to Russia. If those routes are blocked or threatened, it affects everything, from military logistics to civilian supplies. Shortages of fuel, food, and water would not only impact Russian troops, but also the population under occupation. Such conditions weaken morale and further strain Moscow's control. The psychological dimension is equally important. Crimea was presented by the Kremlin as a permanent part of Russia, a victory that couldn't be reversed. Now, with strikes reaching deep into the peninsula and with key infrastructure repeatedly damaged, that perception is cracking. For Russian citizens, seeing Crimea under threat challenges one of the central narratives of Putin's rule. That Russia is strong, secure, and unassailable. For Ukraine, this offensive is about more than just military advantage. It's also about sending a message to its own people, to its allies, and to its enemies. The message is that Ukraine is capable of striking back, of adapting, and of reclaiming what's rightfully its own. Every successful operation boosts morale, strengthens international support, and proves that progress, though slow, is possible. The international implications are also worth noting. NATO and Western allies view Ukraine's ability to strike at Crimea as evidence that continued military aid is paying off. Long-range missiles, advanced drones, and intelligence sharing have all contributed to these operations. As Ukraine demonstrates its effectiveness, it bolsters the argument for sustained and even increased support from its partners. At the same time, Russia faces growing pressure. To defend Crimea, Moscow has had to divert air defense systems, ships, and troops from other parts of the front. This weakens its overall position and exposes vulnerabilities elsewhere. Moreover, every loss in Crimea carries symbolic weight, shaking domestic confidence and straining political cohesion. Of course, Ukraine's strategy isn't without risks. Crimea remains heavily fortified, with layers of air defenses, naval assets, and Russian troops entrenched across the region. Directly retaking it would require enormous resources, coordination, and international backing. Any misstep could provoke severe retaliation, both militarily and politically. Russia has repeatedly warned that attacks on Crimea cross a red line, and Ukraine must balance its ambitions with the risk of escalation. However, by focusing on cutting off and isolating Crimea rather than immediately invading it, Ukraine minimizes that risk while still achieving strategic gains. The key idea is to weaken Russia over time, to make its position untenable, to exhaust its resources, and to prepare the ground for a future, more decisive move when the conditions are right. This long-term perspective shows Ukraine's evolution as a military power. The early months of the war were defined by desperation and defense. Now, Ukraine is shaping the battlefield, choosing when and where to strike, and forcing Russia to react. That's a sign of strategic maturity and growing capability. From a geopolitical point of view, the pressure on Crimea reshapes the entire Black Sea region. The Russian fleets, with trawl and reduced activity, have opened new opportunities for Ukraine's trade and exports. The reopening of grain corridors, for example, helps stabilize global food markets, especially for countries in Africa and the Middle East that depend on Ukrainian exports. The impact of the conflict thus extends far beyond Eastern Europe. It affects the global economy and food security. The Crimea cut off also carries a symbolic importance for the future of international law and sovereignty. If Ukraine eventually succeeds in neutralizing Russia's hold on Crimea, it would represent a powerful statement against annexation and occupation. It would reinforce the idea that borders cannot be changed by force, and that persistence and international solidarity can restore justice even after years of aggression. For Russia, however, losing grip on Crimea would be a strategic and psychological blow. It would undermine one of Putin's most celebrated achievements and weaken his image of control and authority. It would also shake Russia's position in the Black Sea, reducing its ability to project power into the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The loss of Crimea's ports and airbases would limit Russia's regional reach for years to come. Looking ahead, the next phase of Ukraine's campaign will likely focus on maintaining and expanding pressure. That means more strikes on supply routes, more drone attacks on naval assets, and continued efforts to degrade Russia's defenses. The introduction of Western fighter jets will further tilt the balance, giving Ukraine greater reach and flexibility. At the same time, Ukraine will need to fortify its own positions, rebuild damaged infrastructure, and ensure steady supplies from its partners. The coming months will test the endurance of both sides. Russia's ability to repair the Kerch Bridge and maintain logistical flows will be critical, while Ukraine's success will depend on sustaining the tempo of operations and securing Western aid. Both nations face exhaustion, but Ukraine's advantage lies in adaptability and international support. In the end, what's unfolding around Crimea is a demonstration of how modern warfare has changed. Battles are no longer just about ground troops clashing over cities. They're about information, logistics, and technology. Drones, precision missiles, and satellite intelligence now shape the outcomes as much as tanks or artillery. The side that adapts faster and uses its resources smarter tends to prevail. The story of Crimea's cut off is, at its heart, a story of strategy over brute force. It shows how a smaller, determined nation can challenge a larger adversary by thinking creatively, leveraging technology, and exploiting weaknesses. Ukraine may not retake Crimea tomorrow, but it's steadily dismantling the foundation of Russia's control piece by piece. For now, all eyes remain on the peninsula. Each strike, each disruption, brings new shifts on the board. Whether this offensive ultimately leads to Crimea's liberation or simply changes the balance of power, one thing is clear. It has already transformed the strategic landscape of the war. So that's the deep dive into the strategic meaning of Ukraine's latest offensive and the growing isolation of Crimea. It's a campaign built not on speed but on endurance, not on occupation but on disruption. If Ukraine can maintain this momentum, Crimea's days as a secure Russian stronghold may be numbered. Thank you all for watching. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates and analysis on the world's most important developments. Stay informed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.